It is I, Tantus Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire. Welcome. It is time to continue our discussion on the Pathfinder role-playing game system. We were talking about the environments that you might meet on your adventures while you're traveling. And in particular, I was talking about dungeons. Let's talk about some of the kind of hazards you will encounter in the dungeons some more. The next one I want to talk about is slimes, molds, and fungi. These are kind of things that you will definitely find in dungeons. Dungeons are usually dark and dank and are wonderful places for these type of things to grow. Granted, these things, if you're using spells on them, will be treated like plants. That's a good thing to remember. Now, not all of them, but there are ones that you will find that will be hazardous and will have a CR associated with them, similar to what a trap would have. This means by encountering them, you're basically encountering some kind of difficulty that you have to overcome. Of course, there are all types. From just, you might find glowing fungi that are lighting up a distant cave. Or you might find some kind of edible puffballs that maybe won't taste very good, but if you really need some food and you're desperate, they're there. The book provides an example of a variety of types of these things that you can find within the dungeon, from some that are actually dangerous to some that are more innocuous, and give you some basic information about using them or what you would find out when you're encountering them. So let's move on from there to the big hazard you will find in dungeon: traps. Traps are the big thing. They're the one you're going to encounter most often. Now, traps are broken down into a number of elements when you're talking about them. Of course, they have a CR, a challenge rating. They have a type. They have a perception DC, what you need to roll to notice it. A disable device DC, what you have to roll to disable it. A trigger, what triggers it. A reset if it has one, and any kind of effects it has. Other special elements might be noticed here, including things like if it had the optional bypass built into it. Now, of course, CR stands for the challenge rating. Just like when you're fighting a monster, overcoming a trap, whether you're just encountering it, getting hit by it, or finding and disabling it, or just avoiding it as soon as you found it. This is overcoming the challenge of it, whether it's, the avoiding, disabling, just getting hit by it. It all counts as you have done it. Similar to beating a monster, you earn XP. Now let's talk about the two types of traps, because there are two: mechanical and magical. Mechanical traps are effectively things that people would have built. There are all kinds of mechanical traps, and it will tell you what kind of location they're in, what kind of thing triggers them, what they actually do to people, what you might have to use, like what kind of DC of spotting it you might need with your perception. All this information is going to be provided under a mechanical trap and inform you about how it kind of works there, what kind of thing you're encountering when you're running into it. Magical traps, on the other hand, are a very different kind of beast. They do still tell you some of the similar information, what kind of DC to perception checks you would need to spotting it, what you might need to disable it. This comes in differently, though. As soon as we start talking about disabling it, you need trap finding in order to disable a magical trap. So I could notice it. Doesn't mean I could disable it if I'm not a class that got trap finding. From there, it's actually broken down further into two subtypes: spell traps and magic item traps. Spell traps are exactly that. They're effectively a single spell that's either made permanent or cast upon an area, acting itself as the trap that you're encountering. A lot of its rules are going to be based around the spell itself. On the other hand, magic item trap functions a lot more like a wand or a rod. It's something that's going to use a basically magic item effect, and you would need craft wondrous item as the feat in order to make a magic trap. That's the only thing I want to note about that one. So let's talk about some of the things like the perception DC and the disable device DC. Both of these start at 20 as a basic for a mechanical trap. Okay, why can they be different? Because they can be altered. You see, there's parts of formula that if you raise and increase different aspects of traps, it increases or decreases the various CRs, and that's part of the formula when creating one. So therefore, this starts out as a basis of 20 for both of these, but they can go up and down and then affect the CR directly. On the other hand, every type of magical trap has a basic set of DCs for both of these. 25 plus the high spell level included in it. So effectively, if it's a spell trap, it would be 25 plus whatever spell level the spell it would be. If it's a magic item trap, which may have more than one spell built into it, it would be 25 plus the highest for both perception and noticing it, and the disable DC. Let's talk about the triggers your trap might have. First one, of course, is location. When someone enters a location, it triggers the trap. This could be I step in a certain spot. It could be I walk through a certain area. Whatever it would be, these are a traditional kind of one for mechanical traps, of course. There could be proximity. This is more when you get close to a certain thing, then it triggers it. Close to an area, close to a certain object, things like that, then it's required a certain proximity to something. It's not necessarily the area you're entering into, it's a closeness to something that you're getting too close to it. There's also sound. This would mean, usually these are more magical based, that it would get, the trap itself would have a general kind of perception that it would make, that if you make any kind of noise around it, it would trigger it. The same can be said for visual. Traditionally, it's another one that has, of course, some kind of magic and especially some kind of detection spell associated with it, that when you would be noticed by it, it would trigger the trap. Effectively, when you would be seen by it. Of course, it might have, again, more orders to this and more design built into it, but effectively, it's when it's seeing you. There could be touch. This would mean when eye contact with it. It could be like there's a statue with a jewel on it. When I touch the statue, it turns on the trap and it causes effect. It could keep people from trying to climb up it and steal the jewel. That would be a touch type trigger. It could be timed. It could be at a certain time or a certain number of times, a certain time of day that this trap is triggered. It could be like every 5 minutes the trap goes off just to keep an area, keep people away from it for whatever reason. It can also be spell. And this means it's usually a spell trap and it is triggered exactly the way the spell would be triggered under that description. So certain spells that could be treated as traps, it will say under its description what it would be treated like. You'll go to that for the spell. So most traps have a duration of instantaneous. Bam, they go off. But some do have rounds. They will be measured in, of course, just normal combat turns, normal combat rounds, and you will, of course, just keep track of them. It just gives you a certain amount of time and duration, but it will always be in rounds if it gives a duration. Otherwise, you will just assume instantaneous. Let's talk about traps that reset. Well, there are those that reset and those that don't. So, of course, yeah, you have traps. They go off once. They're done. They've done their thing. They don't reset at all. That's the basic ones that you're going to find a bunch of. There's also the ones that require repair to reset. This means you'll have to spend some money, make a craft check, basically put things back together. It will take a little bit of time in order to repair a trap, but it is possible. The next one is, of course, manual reset. That would mean like something comes swinging down and hits someone. I would need to pull a lever or pull a chain or something to manually reset the trap and put it back into place, but it would be a lot easier to reset up again. The last one, of course, is the automatic trap, which this one, it either automatically resets as soon as it's done doing its thing, or after a certain period of time, it will then also reset. That, like, you know, it could be like a pit trap that goes ka-chunk, ka-chunk right away, so that it's ready for the next person to walk over. Or it could be like a swinging blade that swings out, and then after a certain point in time, it comes back. Something like that, that after a certain point in time, it resets back to the way it originally was, ready to do it again, but it is automatic, and the trap does it on its own. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there is always the option of the bypass. This would be for someone in, let's say, your facility would be active and you'd have a trap in it. You might have some kind of bypass. This could be some kind of keyhole, which you could disable it possibly to just disable and bypass the trap. It could be some kind of hidden switch you'd have to find and flip it. Or it could be a hidden keyhole, sort of combining the two of those, that you need to like find the place and then also disable it if you don't actually have the key to get across it. And this might be another way to get around possibly dealing with the trap. And also, it's easier to disable a keyhole than it is to disable a trap, because the trap, you have a chance of setting it off on yourself. Now, there are a lot of different effects that a trap can have. Traditionally, they're going to be some kind of damaging effect. Traditionally, it's going to either be related to some kind of attack roll, or it will force you to make a save. One of the two of these things will occur. Certain examples would be like a pit trap. That's a traditional type of trap. It's a hole you fall down into. Usually it's covered over by something that's making you not realize you're falling down into a hole, or it's positioned in such a way that, like, I walk around the corner, I fall down. It's an idiot's trap, but it exists. Pit traps, again, you know, you're going to take the falling damage. There might be something in it that you'll be encountering, and those will change the dimensions and the challenge of the trap. Depending on how deep it is, depending on what's in it, these sort of things alter the nature of a pit trap. Of course, there are spells that make attacks, and they could either be melee attacks or ranged attacks. It could be a trap that shoots an arrow. It could be a trap that swings a blade. Both exist perfectly fine. There are traps that, of course, mimic a spell. It's a spell trap. Most of the time, all the effects it's going to have are then according to what the spell is. Magic item traps tend to be the same, that it's going to be based upon the spells related to it, or whatever magic item it's technically mimicking, whichever one of those is appropriate. Other special effects can be added on to traps, like poisons. Poisons would be something special. Poison could be on a blade, on an arrow, that sort of thing. You could fall into a vat of poison if it's contact. It could be things that would try to drown you. These are special effects that a trap could have, that you could fall into like a water pit that you would be completely covered into and couldn't get out. You'd be attempting to drown you. It's entirely special rules in comparison to what they would be from before. Now, pits can have other optional elements sort of built into them. They can have things involving liquids, like water with the drowning. It could involve gases, like a poison gas. It could involve alchemical items. It could dump a whole bunch of alchemist fire on you. It could involve multiple targets. It could be a trap specifically designed to it. Unless it's noted, you're assuming the trap's only going to hit one target. It will say if it can target more than one person, and then, yeah, it can. There can be no miss traps. No miss traps have no attack roll, get no save, but they have an onset delay, meaning that you have a couple of seconds or a little bit of time that you could somehow react to what's going on here and perhaps avoid it. That, you know, maybe it's trying to trap you in a room, going to fill it with water to drown you. And of course, I did mention poison. Poison's a pretty popular one, actually, so it's one to think about. But also, you have to think about with pits. What if there's spikes in the pit? That counts as a separate element, technically, because the spikes would get attack rolls, technically, to see which one of those is hitting you, and to see how much damage each one of those dealing you when you're falling in there. You're seeing, like, how well you hit the spikes. There's different sort of rules for the spikes in the pit, even. Now, traps can have touch attacks, that they just need to really glance you with whatever they're doing in order for them to affect you. The rules go on and expand extensively. The book gives an entire listing of sample traps that you can look at of various CRs that you could use for any of your campaigns or adventures, or ones that you'd possibly encounter to give you a good idea of what all these different traps are. It also moves on from there and gives the basic rules for building your own trap. It tells you the three main things you're going to have to look at: CR, cost, and construction time. Construction time involves also the actual DC of the craft check in order to make it, and it describes it based upon the kind of things you're putting together. Cost, of course, depends on the overall CR also, so everything is based upon this CR, which is a bunch of formulas for it. It tells you things like, of course, the perception and the stable device. As you go up and down from the basic numbers from them, it increases or decreases the DC. The amount of damage it does, the more it does, the higher the DC is. Certain elements that you add that I've talked about, if you add them in, it increases the DC. The larger the area, the higher the CR. Multiple targets, higher CR, things like that make it also more difficult to overcome and can increase the amount of money it costs. If you're adding things in like arrows and adding things in like alchemical items or poisons or stuff like that, it costs you more money. And it gives this entire area that gives you all the information you have to know to build a lot of your normal basic traps. There is other materials that will have more basics for traps that you can look into to possibly expand out for more than just this little information that's provided here. This gives you a great amount of information for providing a wide variety of traps, because effectively you're just doing a couple of basic things with it and then putting it all together, and that's the trap you want to design. It's you kind of figure out what your trap is doing and you just come up with it based upon the information that's provided there and do it. It just comes down to the basic numbers are fairly similar for all the different traps. They really are. It's just the little flair and detail in how to describe it that makes the difference between them and adds something different between them. So that's it for today. I introduced you to some more hazards you're going to find in the dungeon. I talked about the slimes, molds, and fungi you're going to encounter. I talked about that there are some that you're going to find that are harmless, maybe helpful, and others that are terrible, and you don't want to encounter them because they're a CR encounter and will therefore give you experience to overcome them. So maybe you actually do want to encounter them to get a little extra experience, but still they're not pleasant to encounter. And then I talked all about traps, talking to you about the basic information provided, the different elements in a trap, what all these elements mean, talked about the basics of all the different types of traps there are, talked about some sample traps, and making your own trap just a little bit. In the next episode, I'm going to expand the environments and move on to the wilderness, where you are in between dungeons or in between towns, when you're wandering the woods, climbing a mountain, things like that. You're going to be in the wilderness at some point usually in most adventures, so I'm preparing you for it. So if you have any questions, comments, anything you would say, anything you think I left out, please just leave it in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe just for the channel, the empire, and the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, you could always check out my Patreon, link to the description below. But regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.